Hey, thanks for checking out The Solid Verbal. Now would be a great time to subscribe to the channel for college football content all off season long. I think I'd like to stay positive if I'm gonna be the truffle hunter on this show, hunting for upside in the dirt. Give me Tennessee and the quest to be a more complete team. I don't know if that's your fascination point, the defense and how can they close the gap to holding up their end of the bargain. But that to me, Tennessee and the fire of a million Vols, that's what I'm ready for.
The fire of a million Vols.
Yeah.
Look at you. I think the defense is a bit underrated.
Okay.
Because if you look at the numbers, they were pretty good against the run. They struggled against the pass, and they were really beat up.
They were.
In the secondary. This year, they're healthy and they're back. The linebacking position is the area where I'm most concerned with because of newness.
Mm-hmm.
I think they'll be fine up front, even though they lose Byron Young, who was, an all-conference guy, had a bunch of sacks. They were good last year against the run. They really, truly were. And I think it was last season, as it is this season, more a question of the pass defense, which I think could take a step forward. So that's not to say they're going to fully close the gap on the offense, if only because the offense is so damn good.
Right.
But I think if much like we talk about with teams like Oklahoma and USC and North Carolina, any number of teams that have these dynamic offenses, they could just be a smidge better on defense. It would make the team a lot better. I think Tennessee falls into that camp, but I think they could take a step forward because their defense wasn't that far off last year. They just had their moments, especially with respect to their passing defense. The most fascinating thing for me on the Tennessee side is going to be seeing Joe Milton back now as a full-time starter in his sixth season of college football.
Good for him.
Right? Came in with the class of 2018.
Is he leaving a dentist? What is when you spend that much time? I hope so.
Joe Milton III.
Yeah.
I mean, I like him.
Mm-hmm.
I like him. I didn't like him as much in his time at Michigan, but he transferred out.
The best of him. Yeah.
Transferred out of Michigan after a couple seasons in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And he got out at the right time, interestingly enough, because that was right around the time when Jim Harbaugh was scrapping the whole plan to go to something that was more wide open.
Yep.
And going more of the Stanford route of what has now materialized into a really good system and one that has pumped out back-to-back playoff contenders. This system, obviously, at Tennessee is much friendlier to quarterbacks. And at this point, he's 3 years into this thing. He knows the system. He was MVP of the Orange Bowl when they beat Clemson. He's a monster of a man, Dan. He's like almost 6'6". He's got a cannon for an arm. I am excited to see what he can do because most of his line up front is back. The entire backfield in Jalen Wright and Jabari Small is back. Those guys combined for over 1,600 yards and 23 touchdowns on the ground last season. The receiving core does lose Cedric Tillman, does lose Jalen Hyatt.
It does.
To be honest, I'm more concerned about Hyatt than Tillman. But beyond that, I feel like the weapons will emerge in a system like this, which is just so damn friendly to the passing game and the quarterback.
Yeah.
I am really, really pumped on that front for Joe Milton. And I feel good for him just kind of on a human level because he is not a guy who bounced around a lot. He waited around at Michigan until it was apparent that either he wasn't going to get the gig or the system wasn't going to be friendly to his skill set. Then he went over to Tennessee. He has waited patiently now behind.
Was named the starter at Tennessee.
Right. Was named the starter, right? But didn't decide to go elsewhere, has been very, very patient.
Mm-hmm.
And in limited action last season, threw like 10 touchdowns, no interceptions, has been very solid, definitely proved to have a command of this offense. And even though there are some big names that have gone now to the pros, what remains is still Brew McCoy. You remember Brew McCoy? He's another name who's been around forever. He figures to be the number one. It just feels to me like with the weaponry that Tennessee brings back on the offensive side of the ball, that they should again be really, really good.
Yeah, Dante Thornton, I think, transferred Oregon to Tennessee, another big body at receiver who, when he was on the field at Oregon, was very promising. So hopefully he's a big play receiver for the Vols as well. Yeah.
I don't want to make too much of the fact that Alex Golesh, their former offensive coordinator, now is the head coach at USF because offensive coordinator under Josh Heupel is kind of like an understudy thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so Joey Halsell, who we looked at, we slacked about a little bit, definitely looks like he could run a surf shop in Southern California if he wanted to.
He was the quarterback at Jimmy Clausen's high school right before Clausen.
Yeah, like
He's a local to me.
Could run the surf shop if the coordinator thing does not work out for him.
Yeah.
He's going to be taking on some of the play calling, though not all of it, because it's just not how the Heupel system works. I don't think we'll see much of a difference on offense. If anything, we're going to see more deep balls. And that brings me to my hot take.
Uh-oh.
And I don't know if I've got the spicy thing on here. I will have to find it. My hot take with Tennessee is that they're beating Alabama again this year on the road in Tuscaloosa.
In Tuscaloosa, smoking cigars. Okay.
Yeah. And we could talk about Bama next if we're drafting interesting teams. But Bama has more questions this year on offense and on defense, maybe in the secondary, than I can remember in a long time. I don't have faith in their quarterback situation at all.
Okay.
And with the secondary being such a work in progress, or at least it feels that way from afar, knowing that Tennessee has this system, it's going to remain intact. Joe Milton can run it. He's bigger, probably stronger armed than Hendon Hooker. It just seems like that's a bad matchup for Alabama. It seems like a bad matchup for Alabama, even despite the fact that Jalen Hyatt is gone. Like some new guy will emerge, and provide that pop over the top.
Okay,
so that is my hot take, and it's a perfect segue into talking about your Alabama Crimson Tide, Dan.
Okay, so my only counterpoint with Tennessee is to assume Joe Milton continues what Hendon Hooker did last year is almost underappreciating Hendon Hooker. That until his injury, and maybe until the Georgia game, fair enough, like this guy was a legit Heisman front runner, right?
Yeah.
Like he was incredible for Tennessee. And so I understand optimism. I am optimistic about Joe Milton, but I think what you did unintentionally was like, yeah, of course Joe Milton's going to be Hendon Hooker. Like that's a friggin' tall order, man.
Well, look, that's a really good point. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to do that because Hendon Hooker had a great season last season. But what I think will be fascinating this year to that point, is this a system thing or is this a quarterback thing?
Oh, I think it's both, but yeah.
It's a little bit of both. Part of the reason why Hendon Hooker didn't get drafted higher was because all the NFL scouts said that it's a one-read system.
Right.
It's all about quick reads, and Hendon Hooker, he needs to work on his processing if he wants to be an effective NFL pro. He was also older.
Older
right?
and hurt, and yeah.
Older and hurt, and there were like things that factored in there. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see, is this system plug and play for another strong arm quarterback who makes the right reads right out of the gun, right out of the chute, or is this going to be the kind of thing that we will see drop off going away from Hendon Hooker? I don't know.